all nations, author of liberty, thank you for the gift of freedom. Today, empower our lawmakers to protect and guard the foundations of our liberty so that America may be a blessing to the world. When our senators are weary, replenish their spirits with the inspiration of your presence. Lord, make them aware that you will never forsake them in their hour of need. Bellow the flickering embers of their hearts until our legislators feel the fires of patriotism, service, and hope. We pray in your marvelous name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 4th, 2021. To the Senate, March 3rd, 2021. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Ben Ray Lujan, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 1, S11.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to S11, a bill to provide for an exception to a limitation against appointments of persons as Secretary of Defense within 7 years of relief from active duty as a regular commissioned officer of the Armed Forces.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I begin this morning with a very exciting announcement about critical leadership roles in the Senate chamber. 3 outstanding individuals are set to resume new responsibilities. Lieutenant General Karen Gibson will serve as the next Senate Sergeant at Arms, while Kelly Fado will serve as Deputy Sergeant at Arms, and Jennifer Hemingway will serve as Chief of Staff. The Senate Sergeant at Arms was established 223 years ago as an outgrowth of the office of the Senate doorkeeper, back when one of the biggest problems was making sure the Senate had a quorum. Today, the Sergeant at Arms is the Senate's Chief Administrative Officer and Chief Law Enforcement Officer, so very important at this time. These offices have enormous responsibility of keeping the trains running on time, while at the same time keeping everyone in the Capitol safe. As we've seen in recent weeks, the security component of the role is immensely important. And Lieutenant General Karen Gibson is the perfect person for this job, the job of Sergeant at Arms. She has spent 33 years in active duty in the military, much of it in the Office of Director of National Intelligence as a senior intelligence officer, where she supported U.S. national security objectives in Iraq, Afghanistan, East Africa, the Pacific, and across the Middle East. She is ready to hit the ground running because since January 6th, she has been part of a weeks-long review to identify actions that can be taken immediately to improve the security of the Capitol and its members. She is 100% committed to ensuring a safe and secure working environment for senators, visitors, Capitol employees, Senate staff, press, and paying particular attention to staffers of color. Lieutenant General Gibson has a big job ahead of her, but I have every confidence she will perform her duties at the same exemplary standard she set over the course of her heralded 3-decade military career. Kelly Fado and Jennifer Hemingway, meanwhile, are two of the most recognizable faces in the Capitol. Jennifer, having recently filled in as the acting Sergeant at Arms, and Kelly has been part of my team for many years on the Rules Committee and in my leadership office. She has helped plan, coordinate, safeguard, and execute multiple presidential inaugurations, and what a great job she had done in every one of them, and Capitol-wide ceremonies in general. And she's been an indispensable resource to me and to my entire staff. So I'm very glad that Kelly is taking on this challenge. And one other note that I'm very proud of, I think we all as senators can be proud of, this will be the first time in the Senate's history that the Sergeant-at-Arms leadership will be comprised entirely of women. And I cannot think of a team better prepared than Lieutenant General Karen Gibson, Kelly Fado, and Jennifer Hemingway. To all three of them, congratulations on your new roles, and thank you for your many years of service to the Senate and to our country. Now, on the American Rescue Plan, Mr. President. As early as tonight, the Senate will move to take up the American Rescue Plan, a bill designed to immediately deliver help to American families, workers, and businesses struggling under the weight of the pandemic, and to lay the foundation for our nation's recovery, so needed. Every day, we see signs of hope and signs of caution in our fight against the COVID pandemic. As of today, in good part because the Biden administration is really doing a good job, over 78 million doses of the COVID vaccine have been administered in the country, and over 100 million have been shipped, well ahead of the rosiest expectations at the start of the year. And just yesterday, President Biden announced that there will be enough vaccines for every adult in the United States by the end of May. By the end of May, far sooner than most had thought. And again, President Biden is doing a great, and his team are doing a great job in moving the vaccine out quickly but fairly. Still, the United States averages 66,000 cases of COVID per week. That exceeds anything we saw last summer during the worst months of the spread. So we cannot relax, and the need for the legislation that is before us is stronger than ever before. It's a similar story with the economy. There are green shoots, but unemployment is still over 6% and 9% for African Americans. The economy has lost 10 million jobs compared to a year ago. Tens of millions of Americans report being thousands of dollars behind in rent and utility. And as Treasury Secretary Yellen and Federal Reserve Chair Powell have repeatedly warned us, our economy and its recovery remain deeply uncertain. There are bumps, but mainly because of the stimulus bills we have done. We did a bill in March, and the May and June numbers look pretty good, but then sunk again over the summer and fall. We did a bill in December. The January numbers look pretty good. But that is not evidence that the economy is able to sustain things on its own. That is evidence that the federal government needs to continue its role to get us back on track. And we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. The American Rescue Plan is designed to build on our early progress and finish the job, to help our country get through the final months of the crisis, and then, equally important, bring our economy roaring back. We cannot go through the situation we did back in 2009, where the stimulus wasn't strong enough, and we stayed in recession for years. So just because the numbers are not as bad as they were, doesn't mean we don't need a continued strong push to get us out of this ditch and go upward and forward. Now, we had always hoped that this very important work would be bipartisan. Regrettably, it seems that too many of our Republican colleagues are resorting to the same predictable objections they raise about nearly every proposal supported by a Democrat. It doesn't matter what's in the bill. Everything my colleagues oppose is, quote, a liberal wish list. That's what many of them call it. Well, let me tell you, this bill is not a liberal wish list. This is an American wish list. When people want checks to help them get out of the morass, that's not a liberal wish list. That's what the American people want. It's an American wish list. When people want resources to open schools quickly and safely, that's not a liberal wish list. That's an American wish list. When people want assistance for the hardest hit small businesses, that's not a liberal wish list. That's an American wish list. Funding to keep teachers, firefighters, transit workers, first responders in red states and blue on the job, not a liberal wish list, an American wish list. So many of the people affected by this bill are not liberals or Democrats. They may be Republicans, they may be independents, they may be conservatives, but they're Americans who want some help to get out of this morass. And money to expand the testing and speed of the distribution of vaccines, the cornerstone of ending this crisis once and for all, that's not a liberal wish list. That's an American wish list. Everyone wants the vaccine out there. And direct checks, as I mentioned, as promised to Americans struggling to keep up with expenses, to buy the groceries, the medicine, to pay the rent and utilities. That's not a liberal wish list. That's an American wish list. And I'd ask my Republican colleagues to go ask their constituents which of these things their constituents oppose. None. That's what the data shows. The American Rescue Plan will be the single largest anti-poverty bill in recent history, with crucial assistance for American families, particularly those struggling with the costs of child care. And it will give tax breaks for low-income workers, so when they work hard, they can afford the necessities of life. So these things are, quote, the liberal wish list that Republicans are talking about: support for schools and jobs and families and workers and the vaccine. No way. Ironically, the, quote, liberal wish list includes a whole bunch of bipartisan amendments that were accepted, including provisions to help restaurants, sponsored by Senators Sinema and Wicker, a vaccine public awareness program, sponsored by Senators Cardin and Portman, a provision to better target direct payments, sponsored by Senators Manchin and Collins. Make no mistake, the American Rescue Plan is a very, very strong bill that will move our country forward in amazing ways. So, it should come as no surprise that support of the American Rescue Plan is coming from all over the country. Hundreds of business leaders, not the most liberal bunch, have urged Congress to pass this bill. Mayors from more than 435 mayors and state leaders, Democrats and Republicans, have said the same. They want the bill. As one Republican mayor from Michigan put it, the need is real, and not just in Democratic communities. He went on to tell his fellow Republicans in Washington who opposed the bill to, quote, talk to some of the Republican mayors. Talk to some of the Republican mayors. But if my Republican colleagues here in the Senate don't want to listen to the words of their fellow Republicans and governors, they can look at the polls which show the vast majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, should support this bill. It seems like the only people who are dead set against this bill are Republican senators, not Republicans out in the country, not Republican mayors, not Republican business people, not Republican small businesses. I guess all of this should be expected. COVID-19 is not a red state or a blue state crisis. Our Republican friends should know that. It's not a Democrat or Republican concern. They should know that too. COVID-19 is a menace to all of us, and we should be banding together to fight it. The economic crisis has affected all of us, and the plan that we're going to vote on this week is going to provide real, robust relief for all of us. Whatever our Republican colleagues decide to do, the Senate majority is intent on going forward and helping the American people with bold action quickly. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
The absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last year Congress rallied 5 times around historic bipartisan legislation to meet urgent and unprecedented needs. Our COVID-19 packages reinforced the healthcare front lines, fueled the sprint for vaccines, and cast lifelines for the workers and small businesses hit hardest by shutdowns. Together, those bills cost about $4 trillion, but none of those measures passed the House of Representatives with less than a bipartisan supermajority of about 80%, completely overwhelming support. Then last week, House Democrats rammed through the American Rescue Plan Act on a razor-thin margin of 50.7%. The only thing bipartisan about their bill was the opposition to it. Their bill costs about $2 trillion. That's roughly the same size as the entire CARES Act that saved our health system and economy through months of shutdowns last year. Even liberal experts admit this is far out of proportion to what's needed now, with vaccines going into arms and the economy already primed to literally roar back. Amazingly, Democrats managed to allocate less than 9% of their massive bill to the entire health care response. 9% of the $1.9 trillion related to the healthcare response. And listen to this, even less than 1% of the $1.9 trillion to the vaccines that will actually finish the fight. They needed to save the other 91% of the borrowed money for a vast catalog of liberal spending with basically no relationship whatsoever to beating COVID-19. For example, they want to send wheelbarrows of cash to state and local bureaucrats to bail out mismanagement from before the pandemic. They're changing the previous bipartisan funding formula in ways that will especially bias the money toward big blue states. This outraged a bipartisan group of governors, largely from Middle America, who went on record this week. There are generous new benefit packages for government employees. There are provisions to let abortion providers drain money from rescue programs that were built to save Main Street small businesses. It's a strange new Excella corridor kickback, where they'll make Medicare send more money to just New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Delaware. Just looking at the time frame for all of their spending belies any notion that this is an urgent rescue plan. Take the K through 12 funding, which, contrary to science, Democrats say is a prerequisite for opening schools. 95% of that supposedly urgent money would not be spent this fiscal year, but instead over the next 7 years. Say that again, 95% of the money for K through 12 not going to be spent this year, but over the next 7 years. Not my definition of an emergency. Grants for rural health care would be on a slow drip out through fiscal 2024. Agriculture-related funds would trickle out over the next, listen to this, over the next decade. Doesn't sound very urgent to me. What the American people need are fast-acting plans to get schools reopened now, get laid-off workers back into jobs, and finish the fight against this virus right now. The Democrats have instead drawn up a liberal omnibus to fund miscellaneous government spending over the next decade. So we're adding all this money to the national debt in the name of a rescue package, with most of the money being spent out far in the future. So, Mr. President, that's why there was bipartisan opposition over in the House. That's why aspects of the House bill are already dropping like flies before this thing even hits the Senate floor. A pet project for the San Francisco Bay Area, gone. Special upgrades for a bridge connecting New York to Canada, gone. Even CNN had to admit these were, quote, controversial, end quote. Senator Sanders' far-left minimum wage policy that would have killed 1.4 million jobs just as we try to recover, that appears to be gone too, at least for now. According to public reports, right now, as we speak, several of our Democratic colleagues are frantically trying to trim back other crazy provisions. The runaway government bailouts, the policies that will keep workers at home when we should be focusing on rehiring. Just a few days ago, President Biden's chief of staff bragged that this smorgasbord of borrowed money will add up to, quote, the most progressive domestic legislation in a generation, end quote. So that's what you get when the Democratic leader persuades all of my distinguished friends across the aisle that their first undertaking as Senate committee chairman should be to outsource all their gavels to the House. Now, Mr. President, the Senate wrote the CARES Act. In the earliest days of the crisis, this chamber took the bull by the horns. I personally assembled bipartisan task forces that crafted urgent solutions that helped America weather the storm. This time around, on the substance, the Senate has been largely missing in action. House Democrats are bristling and publicly pushing back if our Senate Democratic colleagues even try to make their mark on this partisan bill in small ways. So these two radically different processes have generated two radically different pieces of legislation. The Democrats had a choice. They chose to go it alone, tack to the left, leave families' top priorities on the cutting room floor. Now, on a completely different matter, just 6 weeks into unified Democratic government, we already have another crisis brewing on our southern border. In January, Customs and Border Protection logged more than 78,000 encounters on our southwest border, more than double the figure from January of 2020. Last week, HHS sources told reporters we just logged the busiest February in the history of the unaccompanied alien child program. The number of kids turning up on our border with no parents is soaring, and everyone expects the numbers to keep climbing. Now, the Biden administration is reportedly planning to reopen the same kinds of emergency shelters over which Democrats vilified the Trump administration a couple of years back. Both President Biden and his Secretary of Homeland Security have said this week they don't think this is a crisis. Not a crisis, they say? Well, if this isn't a crisis, with unaccompanied kids pouring in and exceeding capacity amid a pandemic, I'd hate to see what one looks like. The cause of this emergency is not some mystery, not mysterious at all. Everybody knows exactly what happened. The new administration explicitly campaigned on weakening border security, and 6 weeks in, they've reversed the Remain in Mexico policy, begun letting more people in a haphazard way, and broadcast confusing, mixed messages. The LA Times says, quote, Biden immigration policy stirs confusion at Mexico border. They interviewed one woman who'd crossed the Rio Grande on a smuggler's raft and was only briefly detained before being released into our country. She explained she'd specifically come because of the new Biden administration, quote, that gave us the opportunity to come. Another reporter put it this way, the message received in Tijuana and other Mexican border cities was simple. Joe Biden was now letting people in. We're not just talking about the fine details of border policy. The big backdrop behind this whole discussion is the sweeping left-wing amnesty plan that the Biden administration unveiled before they were even sworn in. They want to fast-track 11 million illegal immigrants into temporary legal status, then green cards, and then full citizenship. So, Mr. President, the far left loves this approach, but so does a certain cross-section of big business. There's a whole lot of cultural power and economic power pushing the liberal vision. As for the best interest of America's workers, well, that's not as trendy a cause in certain circles. The truth is that it's not helpful or compassionate to just open up our borders. It's not fair to American citizens and workers, but neither is it fair to the people who are being lured into a humanitarian crisis in the middle of a pandemic because they believe this Democratic administration just conspicuously turned on a neon vacancies sign. Republicans just spent 4 years making major headway on the security and humanitarian crisis at our border. It took serious policy changes. It took international diplomacy with multiple countries, and it took border enforcement. The American people would be better served if the Biden administration had chosen to build on this progress instead of rapidly trying to tear it down. I suggest that, Mr. Quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Oh,
Mr. President,
the Assistant Democratic Leader,
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Mr. President, history was made on Monday. Judge Merrick Garland finally got a vote before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was a long time coming. His nomination was approved by a bipartisan vote of 15-7. I'm not surprised. He is superbly qualified to be the next Attorney General of the United States. Experience, judgment, integrity, he checks all the boxes. He served with distinction on the D.C. Circuit Court for 23 years, and in that time developed a reputation for fidelity to the rule of law, strict adherence to judicial independence, and a commitment to treat people with fairness, dignity, and respect. It's no surprise that he's been endorsed by 60 former federal judges and by judges, of course, who've been appointed by presidents of both political parties. In addition to his experience on the bench, he is a longtime veteran of the Department of Justice, where he served before he ascended to the D.C. Circuit. He's uniquely qualified at this moment in history to lead the department, to investigate and prosecute, for example, the January 6th insurrection, the mob that invaded this Capitol building. The reason he's qualified is he led the investigation and prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombing. We remember that very well. That was clearly a case of domestic terrorism. His work on that project won praise from across the political spectrum. He also personally understands the department's role in protecting civil rights. I believe he's the person to restore honor and dignity to this department. He has support from every major law enforcement organization in the country, 150 former Justice Department officials of both parties, the nation's leading civil rights organizations, and many others, left, right, and center. His credentials are second to none. And his character in particular, his selflessness, is a model to us all. When we held the markup in the committee on his nomination, the most significant witness may have been a lady by the name of Mrs. Butler. She testified in the second panel. She's the mother of 2 D.C. public school students who have been tutored and mentored by Judge Garland. After her first child had received his helping hand for several years, the second child asked if he could be included in the next round, and then they both wanted the help of Judge Garland. Doesn't it speak volumes of a man who's reached that station in life, that he would be so humble as to sit down and help children he'd never met before find their way through life? It was a touching moment when she testified. It really was an insight into his character. So you'd think with 15-7 vote, you'd think with all these endorsements, you think with the fact that 4 members of the Republican side of the Senate Judiciary Committee behind him, that this would be a nomination so important to this nation of an Attorney General that would be given expedited treatment on the floor of the Senate. Nope. Unfortunately, there was an objection to expediting his nomination so he could get to work at the Department of Justice. And as a consequence, we face the Senate procedure, which means that it could be days, maybe even into next week, before he can take the job. That's unfortunate. We need him now more than ever. Even Republican leader Mitch McConnell has said he would support him. Chuck Grassley, my friend and the ranking member in the Senate Judiciary Committee, he voted for him. There's just no reason why the Senate should not immediately hold a vote for Merrick Garland's nomination. He is the last remaining member of President Biden's national security team to be chosen. It's time for him to take this job. The Attorney General is needed. to fight the threat of domestic terrorism, which the FBI director spoke to yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee, to reorganize this department and get it moving in the right direction, and to face the many challenges when it comes to national security and the administration of justice. We should confirm Merrick Garland immediately. I sincerely hope that whoever is holding his nomination on the other side can be persuaded to give him his chance. Mr. President, I'd like to speak to a different subject and ask that it be placed in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
I listened to the speeches, Mr. President, of Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, about the American Rescue Plan, Joe Biden's proposal, his initial proposal as president, to deal with the pandemic, the state of the economy, and many other aspects of American culture and life that need to be addressed. And clearly there's a difference of opinion. I couldn't help but think, as Senator McConnell was recounting our experience last year, that when it came to the CARES Act, a year ago, the $2 trillion plan to respond to the state of the pandemic and the economy, the plan that was engineered by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, a member of the Trump administration, and bargained and negotiated with Republicans and Democrats alike, that when they finally agreed, the vote was 96-0 in this chamber. Every Democrat voted for the proposed CARES Act that was engineered by the Trump administration. Party was pushed aside because the priority was our nation. Happened again in December of last year. President Trump's administration, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin at the table, Democrats and Republicans bargaining, the final vote 92-6 in the Senate. Not bad. And the 6 noes were all Republicans. Again, the Democrats stepped up and said, we will support this bipartisan effort because that's why we're here. The American people sent us here to do a job. Now comes the new president, Joe Biden, and says, good work last December, but that was temporary, and that was supposed to be a special effort. Now we've got to finish the year. We've got some deadlines coming. Just 2 weeks from now, less than 2 weeks, the unemployment insurance programs will be running out for millions of Americans. And the rental assistance program as well. Some will face eviction, some will not have enough money to feed their families, so get to work. Pass the American Rescue Plan on a bipartisan basis. We have yet to hear one Republican senator who will support President Biden's plan. Some of them have legitimate differences with his policy, and I wish they would come to the table and be part of the conversation, but none of them has really stepped up and said, we're in for the big effort that the president's calling for. That's what it will take. And unfortunately, because of that, in a 50-50 Senate, we will need every Democratic senator to support the president's plan and to pass a version of what the House is sending over to us. We'll go through an exercise called reconciliation in just a few days. It's not a pretty scene if you follow legislative history, but it's long overdue. And do you know the one thing that should drive us on is not only the obvious need for this, but the fact that the American people overwhelmingly support what President Biden proposed. The American people believe, as he does, that we should be investing billions into more vaccines and more people to administer them. The American people believe that a cash payment to families is essential in some parts of this country. They'd like to see the $600 in last December's bill complemented with $1,400 in this proposal. They'd like for us to put money on the table for people who are unemployed so they can put food on that same table. And they'd like for us to get the schools ready to deal with reopening in classes that are safe for the kids and the teachers. There's no argument about that. 20% of people may oppose it. but 80% supported. And yet we can't find one Republican senator to support President Biden's plan. They say it costs too much. Well, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell, a conservative Republican economist, has told us, be careful that you do too little. This economy is fragile. It needs to be strengthened. We need to inject into this economy enough of our resources so that people are back purchasing again and businesses are reopened. He's warned us, if you do too little and you cut it off too soon, you're going to pay for it for years to come with unemployment and problems with the sluggish economy. My Republican colleagues say it's just too much money. Well, I think they're wrong. And at this moment in history, I'm prepared to err on the side of investing in the American people and American businesses and making certain that we have a fighting chance to put this behind us. Our constituents know about the cost of this situation. They want us to provide the solutions. They want results from Congress. If we were to delay this payment, people would see their unemployment insurance lapse and hardships continue. We shouldn't play politics with it either. In the two big bills last year, the Democrats were on board for plans engineered by the Trump administration. Economists believe that we need to move and move decisively. According to an analysis by the Brookings Institution, passing a comprehensive plan like the American Rescue Plan could produce a 4% growth in U.S. GDP this year. Moody's estimates that passing the same plan would create 7.5 million American jobs. How about that? We got good news over the weekend with the arrival of another safe and effective vaccine. This is the third one, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in our arsenal, perhaps more to follow. It holds the promise of finally getting America inoculated, vaccinated, and breaking the back of this pandemic. This new vaccine prevents hospitalizations and deaths, stored at normal temperatures, a single shot, all good news. But we need more than a promise of a vaccine. We need a plan. These vaccines are of no good to us sitting on a shelf or not being produced in volumes necessary. President Biden's rescue plan, which not a single Republican supports, would provide and I think I got the number right, $160 billion in resources for the production of vaccines and the distribution. If we ever needed it, this was the moment. Thankfully, President Biden's leadership has led to allocations to Illinois of vaccines that have increased by 70% since he took over as president. We still have our challenges at the local level. I want to salute the governor, J.B. Pritzker, the mayor of the city of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, the Cook County Board President, Preckwinkle, and all the others who are doing their best. I announced with Senator Duckworth just last Friday that we're going to put a new facility in the parking lot of the United Center where the amazing Chicago Bulls play basketball from time to time. And it's going to be able to vaccinate thousands of people every single day. It's federal assistance that's making it happen. And it happens to be in a neighborhood where African Americans and Latinos are nearby, and we need to protect them with even more effectiveness than we have to date. They account for 33% of the population of that area, and only 16% have been vaccinated. The American Rescue Plan provides $20 billion to expand our vaccine distribution capacity. You would think that that would maybe attract one Republican supporter. It should. There are certainly some who argue against all vaccines and spending any money for it and all the rest, but they are such a small minority. The vast majority of Americans of both political parties understand that we've got to go to vaccinations as quickly as possible. The Biden Rescue Plan does that. I wish they would join us in supporting it. There's also a need for money for education. There's $128 billion in this bill for additional education funding, K through 12. And there's been arguments made on the floor here by the Republicans that we just don't need it. They point to data showing that school districts haven't spent the money that we provided in previous relief packages. Well, just talk to the principals and teachers in your home state about that conclusion. You'll find the money is desperately needed, and that the money that has been appropriated before will be spent in an orderly way and not shoveled out the window. We are looking ahead to the entire year and making certain that we have a real school year, perhaps in the remainder of this year, but certainly for next year. Illinois needs these funds, and America does. When it comes to state and local support, I have to tell you, we've paid a heavy price in our state of Illinois and our major cities. We've seen expenses go up, and we've seen revenue go down, and we need help. Not unreasonable. This helping hand will save jobs that are necessary for us, some of them healthcare jobs, some of them security and safety jobs, but they'll save jobs, and that's why the state and local resources included in this bill are so important and timely. Over the past year, states and localities have lost 1.3 million jobs of their payrolls, far more than the 750,000 lost in the Great Recession. There's needed help from the federal government, and it's needed now. We've recovered just 12 million of the 22 million jobs we've lost since the start of the pandemic. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, more than 8 million rental households and 2 million homeowners were behind on housing payments at the end of last year. The burden is tough, and for those of us lucky enough to have escaped it, we may not know the feeling, the empty feeling of addiction or the loss of a home that you paid a mortgage on for years. I'm going to close. I see one of my colleagues on the floor preparing to speak, but I'd like to close with the story of Galland Hinson from Midlothian, Illinois. For 34 years, Galland has supported touring artists through his work in live concert production for some of America's most iconic musicians. When the American economy was upended by pandemic, his industry froze to save other lives and to avoid crowds. Like so many others, Galland went on unemployment. Yet even with the federal $600 supplement to state unemployment, he had only half of his regular income replaced. He struggles, still struggles, to make ends meet. He wrote to me urging that we put aside our partisan differences and pass the American Rescue Plan. Let's listen to Galland, and let's listen to many others like him. They're counting on us. I hope when all is said and done, after all the speeches, that just as we came together on a bipartisan basis to pass the rescue plan twice last year, 96-0, 92-6, under the Trump administration, with all Democrats supporting it, wouldn't it be great if we showed that same bipartisanship again? I yield the floor.
Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, I have 7 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate with the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.